Six-time Soviet champion, 7 Olympic medals, a 95-game unbeaten streak. The story of Mikhail Tal is one that, if written as fiction, might be dismissed as too unbelievable. And yet, it happened. In some ways, though, it's a bittersweet story. Today we're diving deep into the extraordinary chess career of Mikhail Tal, examining what made him special, analyzing his most brilliant tournament wins and his legacy towards the game. While he showed promise as a young player, Mikhail Tal was by no means a prodigy. By 1954, however, he had already played a match for the title of Soviet Master, which he won against Saigin. From there, he developed quickly, but remained unknown outside of the Soviet Union until he qualified for the 1956 USSR Championship. There, he performed impressively, finishing tied for 5th to 7th place and defeating respected grandmasters such as Tolush and Simagin. It was the following year, however, that saw truly spectacular results, though it almost didn't happen. In the semi-finals of the USSR Championship, Tal couldn't win a single game in the first half of the tournament, but suddenly he found his form and just managed to qualify. Once in the finals, everything changed. Playing a dynamic, captivating style that thrilled the fans, Tal swept to a sensational victory, defeating giants like Bronstein, Keres, Petrosian, and Taimanov. He was crowned Soviet champion and, almost overnight, became an internationally known figure, despite not even holding the title of International Master. Later that year, fittingly, he was awarded the title of International Grandmaster. 1958 would prove even more remarkable. First, there was the Soviet title to defend. Few seriously believed Tal could win it again, and this time, the championship also served as a zonal tournament, with the top players qualifying for the interzonal later in the year. The field was stronger than ever, featuring Petrosian, Bronstein, Spassky, Averbakh, Pologaevsky, Geller, and Korchnoi. It was a harder battle. Tal lost 3 games, but his relentless will to win saw him claim many more victories. Heading into the final round, he faced Spassky, needing a win to overtake the unbeaten Petrosian. For much of the game, Tal was under pressure, but in a complex queen and rook ending, Spassky made a mistake, and Tal seized the opportunity to snatch victory. Winning 2 Soviet championships in a row was almost unheard of, and now it was clear, here was a true contender for the very highest honors. In August, Tal traveled to Portorož for the interzonal, and once again he was unstoppable, finishing ahead of Gligoric, Petrosian, Benko, Olofsson, Fischer, and Bronstein. Naturally, Tal was selected for the Soviet team at the Munich Olympiad. He and Petrosian served as the first and second reserves, a pairing that caused much amusement at the time, and it proved to be a happy hunting ground for Tal, as he cut a swathe through the opposition, scoring an incredible 13.5 out of 15, the best individual score of the event. 1959 began, as usual, with the Soviet Championship, and speculation was high. Could Tal possibly make it 3 titles in a row? It would have been an extraordinary achievement, and although he fell just short, he still finished in an impressive tie for second place, with Spassky just behind Petrosian. That summer, the Zurich Chess Club organized a strong international tournament to celebrate their 150th anniversary. Tal stumbled in the first round, losing to one of the Swiss players, but as so often, he rebounded by winning a high percentage of his games, finishing first ahead of Gligoric, the rapidly improving Fischer, Keres, and Larsen. Still, critics pointed to his occasional losses against lesser-known players and wondered, how would Tal cope with the sustained, intense pressure of the candidates tournament, especially facing seasoned opponents like Smyslov? They were soon to find out. Played across Bled, Zagreb, and Belgrade, the 1959 candidates would be Tal's sternest test yet. Remarkably, he underwent an operation to remove his appendix less than 2 weeks before the tournament began. His second, Averbakh, described him as pale and noticeably haggard, something that even his opponents picked up on. But the mountain air and serene beauty of Bled seemed to revive him. Although he lost to both Keres and Smyslov in the first cycle of matches, Tal won all his other games and shared the lead with Keres and Petrosian. At the start of the second cycle, Tal produced one of the finest games of his career, a brilliant sacrificial attack that demolished Smyslov in just 26 moves. It was a masterpiece talked about and analysed for years afterward. Smyslov never fully recovered from that devastating defeat, and it was Keres who managed to edge ahead by securing a second win against Tal. However, in the third cycle, Tal truly shifted into top gear, conceding only 2 draws in 8 games and defeating Keres in their individual encounter. By the start of the final cycle, Tal was a full point and a half ahead. He continued to dismantle the players in the lower half of the table, achieving a perfect 4-0 record against Fischer and scoring 3.5 points against Gligoric, Olafsson and Benko. Although he lost once more to Keres and was somewhat fortunate to win a lost position against Smyslov, he was able to secure a quick perpetual against Benko in the last round, sealing victory by a clear 1.5 points over Keres, with Petrosian a distant third, 3 points further back. It was an astonishing triumph for a man who, just 3 years earlier, had been virtually unknown on the world stage. Astonishingly, the 2 men who would now contest the World Championship, Mikhail Tal and Mikhail Botvinnik, had never played each other before. Botvinnik's dominance of Soviet chess was almost absolute, and his grip on the world title secured in 1948 had remained nearly as strong. Yet, in the first game, it was Tal who appeared more comfortable coming out the winner. 4 draws followed, and it seemed Botvinnik was easing his way into the match, until Game 6. Starting from an English opening that transposed into a King's Indian, Tal pursued his usual active approach. And at move 21 unleashed a knight sacrifice he had been contemplating since move 14. Within a few moves, the sacrifice yielded him a powerful pawn and a superb pair of bishops. The crowd became so excited that the arbiters had to move the players into a back room to continue the game. In the end, he won the match by a convincing score of 12.5 to 8.5, becoming, at 23 years old, the youngest world champion in history. It seemed there was nothing he could not do. Sadly, it was not to last. Botvinnik again exercised his right to a rematch in 1961, preparing with typical thoroughness, while Tal, whose health was beginning to fail, either could not or would not prepare with the same intensity. Tal returned to form later that year, winning the extremely strong Bled tournament, despite losing to Fischer for the first time. He finished a clear point ahead of Fischer and 2 points ahead of Petrosian, Keres and Gligoric. However, disaster struck the following year. Favoured to win the candidates tournament in Curaçao, Tal started poorly, and it quickly became clear that something was wrong. His kidney troubles worsened, he had to be hospitalised and eventually withdrew from the tournament. Tal would never again play a match for the World Championship. Perhaps not everyone is as familiar with Mikhail Tal's later career, when, despite being continually dogged by ill health, he remained a fearsome opponent and a contender for top honours well into the later stages of his life. Many otherwise excellent historians of modern chess speak as if Tal's career effectively ended after the 1962 candidates tournament, yet that could not be further from the truth. In 1966, he reached the final of the candidates, only narrowly losing to his lifelong friend and rival Boris Spassky, a match his doctors had begged him to play in a sanatorium, given the state of his health. 2 years later, in 1968, he lost in the semi-finals to Viktor Korchnoi. Had results fallen only slightly differently, we might have seen a return final against Spassky, and who knows, even a Tal Fischer World Championship match in Reykjavik in 1972? After all, Tal and Fischer were not only rivals but also friends, something few could claim about the famously enigmatic American genius, and even fewer could boast a positive score against him, as Tal could. As late as 1979, Tal shared first place with Karpov in Montreal, a tournament considered one of the strongest ever staged. He then went on to dominate the Riga Interzonal, winning by a clear 2.5 points. In the 1980s, despite a period of persistent rumors about his declining health and even his death, Tal surprised many by competing successfully in the Grand Prix tournaments. He finished third in the 1985 Interzonal, qualifying once again for the candidates at the age of 49. By then, the grueling demands of match play may have become too much for him against the very best, but tournament chess was a different matter. Even when he didn't finish first, Tal could still light up a tournament with sparkling sacrifices, demolishing a candidate or a rising young star in brilliant fashion. In 1988, he astonished the chess world again, finishing third in the Reykjavik World Cup and winning the World Blitz Championship. Proof that even at a time when younger talents were emerging, the old magic had not faded.
Brain moves instantaneously. 9 seconds left for Yusupov, 1:26 for Tal. Check, pawn queening. What is Yusupov hoping for? Rook and a knight down. Tal just giving back the knight to make things simpler. Yes, over. 3-0 to Mikhail Tal. Fantastic performance.
Tal remained ranked among the top 10 players in the world almost until the very end. He was still competing, still creating beauty on the board, right up to his final days. His last tournament game was a fine win over Grandmaster Vladimir Akopian in Barcelona. A few weeks later, Tal checked himself out of the hospital, against medical advice, to take part in a quick play event in Moscow. There, in one of his final games, he defeated none other than Garry Kasparov. Only days later, to the universal sorrow of the chess world, Mikhail Tal passed away at the age of just 56.
Tal играл последний блиц-турнир в Москве. Там было 8 человек, мы играли в 2 круга. И турнир я выиграл, но проиграл в нем одну партию Таль. Таль пожертвовал фигуру, некорректно пожертвовал, я отбил атаку, просто очень время. Потому что он сумел вот в 5 минут справиться с проблемами, которые ставил Таль. Вот это, наверное, тоже какая-то такая высшая, что ли, истина шахматная. То есть вот буквально совсем вот уже в последние свои дни Таль все равно был в состоянии играть в те шахматы, которые принесли ему вот ту бессмертную славу.
Around the world, chess lovers still debate who was the greatest player of all time, the fiercest attacker, the most complete, the most imaginative. Everyone has their favorite. Books have been written and will go on being written, comparing Alekhine to Kasparov, Capablanca to Fischer. But whatever names are thrown into the ring, there will always be a special place in the hearts of chess fans for Mikhail Tal, the Latvian magician who, in the late 1950s, stormed through the chess world, sweeping aside the safe, the solid, the so-called correct players, and at just 23 years old, captured the ultimate prize, the youngest world champion in history, until Garry Kasparov came along. Thanks for watching it this far. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear which chess legend you want us to cover next.